Welcome to the March 12th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. First item is Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'd like to welcome everybody who's here tonight. There is a public hearing. I'd remind people we'd like to keep it short, but thank you for turning out. We appreciate it very much. We have a new member to welcome on board, Sam Zimmerman, who took Jerry Weeks' place. And welcome, Sam. We look forward to great things out of you.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
And your monthly paycheck or bi-weekly paycheck, we'd like to pick a charity to donate it to. So
I'll keep you advised.
Really is a fairly short agenda tonight. The first item after the pledge is the approval of the minutes of the last meeting on February 26th.
I'll move approval.
Got a motion from David. Do I have a second?
Second.
Pilar, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. The only item really on here is a public hearing tonight for Ocean Bluff at Windsor, a request to modify the conceptual PD plan to change the project boundary and obtain concurrent preliminary PD plan approval for the Ocean Bluff phase of the Windsor project. Dr. Cox has reminded me he was here when we did this swap many moons ago, so we look forward to hearing what's happening. Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Mr. Hamner. Good evening, Commission. I'm John McCoy, Senior Planner, and this is the Windsor Conceptual PD Plan proposal. The applicants requested conceptual and preliminary PD approval, and essentially it's to adjust a boundary, is the conceptual part, to take some property out of Windsor and to put other property in Windsor. The preliminary parts are a preliminary PD, which is a design for the portion they're bringing in. And the conceptual part requires special exception approval. The next slide shows the special exception process. They're taking the first two steps in that process, the conceptual and the preliminary. With that, the site is located on the barrier island just north of the town of Orchid. What's highlighted in blue is now all property owned by Windsor. What's highlighted in red is all public property. On this slide, again, the blue is the Windsor property. The orange is the park site. The orange site was shaded in orange, was owned by the county. Excuse me, what's shaded in blue was owned by the county. What's shaded in orange was owned by Windsor. Essentially swapped those properties. The property that the county got is a little bit greater than the property that Windsor got, just slightly. That's how that worked out. So the actual acreage for the concept plan contracts just a little bit, just a fractional part of an acre. It still stays at 400 units, so there's really not much change in the density, and the density is just under 1 unit per acre. And again, the shading remains the same. Blue is Windsor.
The 400 units is for the entire
site.
No, we'll have heart failure out there.
It is under
We've
one.
lost the left side of the audience, so y'all can get back up now.
It is under 1 unit per acre, so that's usually a safe density. And for the preliminary PD design, it's just an extension of the design that they have along the beach, just coming south. It's between A1A and the ocean, so it's fairly constricted in what they can do design-wise. And again, the density for this portion is just a little bit under an acre, so the preliminary PD is falling right in line with the overall conceptual. As far as traffic circulation, the residents that live down here will have to go back north to go to the main entrance and exit at Windsor and travel back south on A1A. There is an emergency access at the very south end for traffic to go in and out. As far as the landscape and buffering plan, what you'll see along this side is just a continuation of that same buffer that you see along the existing Windsor. It's a type B buffer. They'll do some supplemental planting wherever it's thin. Typically they've used native material. On the south end, there's not a whole lot to work with, so it's going to be a lot of new vegetation. And the 6-foot opaque features required throughout. And the next slide, which is actually the environmental slide, but I'll show you why the buffer on the south side is going to have to be replanted, because it's essentially what was the parking lot for Golden Sands Park. And so there's not much to retain and supplement in that particular area. As far as environmental issues go, The site has 7.2 acres of native uplands. They're required to preserve 15%. They're retaining just a little bit more than that at 1.49 acres. The shaded area is essentially showing you where the conservation easement is. As a Windsor's policy is not to allow any residential construction seaward of the coastal construction line. So right when you get to the coastal construction line on the preliminary plat, it becomes a conservation easement. So they have stuck, as far as I know, very closely to that. With that, there are dedication improvements. There's a right-of-way dedication for State Road A1A. It's 10 feet, and that was the original conceptual plan condition. And then the upland conservation easement will need to be dedicated, and those two will be done at the time of final plat approval. With that is the recommendation, and staff does recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend to the board approval of the special exception use to modify the boundary. And then secondly, we ask that you all approve the preliminary PD tonight, subject to the board's action on the conceptual special exception. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of staff, one way or the other? Would the applicant care to be heard? The applicant does not care to be heard. We'll open the public hearing. The public hearing is open. Please, if you all care to speak, step forward to the mic and line up. And public hearing is now closed. I need a motion.
Move staff recommendation.
Second. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, like sign. Good. I think that, Bruce, this has got to be your easiest meeting, I think. Nobody can argue about the swap. It was done, but, you know, the park's built, so it's a little late for anybody to complain. So thank you all very much. And it's nice that you keep that easement behind the coastal construction line. That really has stayed very well up there. Speaks well of all of you all.
Relocate as many.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is Commissioners' Matters. And if there's anybody besides me, I had one item I thought I'd bring up tonight briefly. It just as a thought, and this I'm not sure. I talked to Stan Bowling. He's not here, and I asked him to talk briefly to Bob. But in thinking about the development, we're going through this 2030 plan with transportation, which looks at land use, et cetera. I didn't know if we could funnel in something to the extent of, as the county moves west, we've got areas out to 95 where we run into ranchettes. It is ag areas, and I represent ag, and I don't want to change any private property rights that I can help. But the closer we get to agriculture and residential areas, we tend to have problems, i.e. the sand mining or other issues. Generally speaking, we don't realize we have the problem until the first project goes in next to a potential residential area, and then we see more of a problem created than maybe our land rules have adapted for. The good news for ag is as people move that way, the property value should go up. And I'm wondering if there's a way we can look at potential land development regulations before we have a problem, kind of a staying ahead of movement, where we tighten up this transitional area in ag, or maybe you call it A1 or east of 95 or something, that we may actually change or restrict slightly the ag uses or ag ability that might save us the trouble in the future, some heartache. And this was just a thought. It wasn't. It's not an issue one way or the other. It was just something I thought. Now, I'll tell you, Bob, and I had a long talk to Stan. I said they have nothing to do. There's no development going on. He's already explained to me they've only got about 3 people in the department, and amazingly, they've found more to do than they have time for. But I figured, what the heck, one more item wouldn't hurt anything.
Yeah, good evening. I'm Bob Keating, County Community Development Director, and what I did talk to Stan about this today after you talked to him, and even though we did address this in the EAR, what I suggest that we do is have staff put together a scope to look at this, where we'll try to ascertain what it is that you all might want to look at and come up with kind of a study design to do this.
Well, the thought I had is, the ag committee went through and did this, but I think that the one thing that and I've been there, and we've looked at the ag uses, and we all go through and go, and I will tell you jealously, from a property owner's right standpoint and private property, I don't want to change any. You don't want to lose any options. Maybe the ag committee, if you did the scope, maybe they could look at what they think might be a reasonable trade-off as you got closer to the ranchette areas or closer to residential, that they may be willing to give up and then we could look at it. I'm thinking that, but that's all. I just think you've got to go through your uses and take a hard look at that in these transitional areas. And
Yeah.
they're slow now, but they're going to come back.
Yeah, let us kind of put it in a scope format so we can
Okay.
kind of look at it on paper and then have an opportunity to discuss it.
George, what specifically has brought this up?
Not just thinking, we've got the sand mining issue that, if you put us, we had the kennel issue.
Right.
As you get closer to how, it's just every time we come up with something on houses, we come up with an issue. Actually, what started my thinking about it was Palm Beach County just did away with their whole ag plan. And I'm not trying to hamstring ag. I'm just thinking that what happens to us is we go along, we have people and places, and then we'll have something come up, and okay, we start tweaking the rules after the fact. It's always the one time after one person is affected, and I didn't know if there was a way to look at something and maybe pre-think or think ahead without hurting ag terribly, and that was all. You realize
Let us-
I'm going to get shot when I walk out of here.
George, let me ask you a question out of my own ignorance. We were talking about friction between uses and these
Right.
friction zones. What are the perceived noxious uses? I just don't know that an ag guy might have that may be considered
Well,
noxious.
the one that's always thrown up is if in ag, I could put a pig farm next to your house, and that's probably not the case. We had a real rub with the sand mines out in the area on 82nd Avenue, and I'm not thinking that they shouldn't be sand mines out there at all, but I'm thinking that maybe if we could look ahead, if I put a packing house in, I can put a packing house in ag, which could be fairly big, and if you were the two ranchettes that I happen to want to go in next to, and I've owned the land for a long time, it may not be the greatest thing in the world for the residential area. Now, the difference is that you've got to weigh how many people you're talking about, the good of the community, the jobs, and et cetera. So I don't want to shut anything down by any means. I just thought, while things are slow, now's a great time to try and get in front of the curve if we could.
There's quite a few things in the ag.
I would suggest, Sam, you might go look at the ag, just look at ag uses. There's a list in there that you
Mental
probably
institutions, prisons,
that you can see.
sports arenas.
So let us come back to you with that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Just like we will be coming back with the turn lanes very soon.
Good.
That's past scope, buddy. All right.
We're trying to pin down Chris Moore, but when he heard turn lanes, he's been a little more
I noticed he
elusive.
didn't show up tonight. No. Okay, anybody else? I didn't mean to beat that to death, but planning matters, you've got your information package,
And since we had one commissioner resign, Commissioner White, who was your representative to the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, we do need an appointment.
I asked for volunteers earlier. Most people were talking. Greg answered me, thinking I was asking another question, so I immediately volunteered Greg for the job, unless anybody has an objection. If not, do we need this motion and approval and all that, or is this
No,
just by
but just
consensus?
by consensus is fine.
Okay. Thank you, Greg. You're a good man.
Oh,
Do well and do wonders.
And I've got several other matters. One is, John just passed out a flyer. We are inviting you to a workshop meeting on Saturday, and this workshop meeting relates to the Metropolitan Planning Organization's long-range transportation plan. The MPO has to do a new long-range transportation plan every 5 years. We're in the process now of beginning the LRTP. It's probably a year-and-a-half process. And the first thing we need to do is really validate the land use plan that we have and look at, actually bring it out to 2035. So what this workshop, even though this is being sponsored by our transportation planning organization, it is a land use workshop to look at really some of the same things we did in the EAR, but look at it countywide, including the municipalities. So we invite you all to come to that. That's 8:30 Saturday morning. The Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council is going to facilitate this workshop. And we anticipate it's going to have pretty good attendance, and it should be a valuable exercise.
Good. Thank you.
So, just a couple of other things that have happened since your last meeting. You may have read in the paper that the Board of County Commissioners took some action regarding impact fees. in essence, what they decided to do was, the terminology is temporarily suspend imposition of 5 of the impact fees. And those are the impact fees that really county staff didn't have as much heartburn losing. The impact fee category that we're really concerned about is transportation, and transportation is not being modified. But the proposal is that the emergency services facilities, correctional facilities, public building development, solid waste facilities, and law enforcement impact fees be suspended for a 6-month period. We are coming to the Board of County Commissioners with an ordinance to that effect on March 24th, and if the board adopts that ordinance, it will be in effect on April 1st. What this is going to do, it's going to reduce residential impact fees about 16%, and some of the commercial impact fees about 35%. So again, this is a temporary measure, and the impetus for doing this are the economic circumstances that the county's in. And this is something that's being done by probably most local governments in the state. They're either eliminating, reducing, or modifying their impact fees.
Bob, for somebody to qualify for this discounted impact fee, is it that they have to be a technical review, or they have to have a building permit application, or what triggers it?
That's a good point, and we are putting some criteria in the ordinance. They have to be at building permit stage or initial final concurrency certificate stage, which is after site plan approval. Either one of those, and the project will need to obtain a certificate of occupancy within 18 months of issuance of the permit, or the suspended fees will need to be paid.
Is that really going to do what this intends? I mean, this is intended to spur on development, but if it only applies to somebody who's going to have their approvals by that period of time, they're already in the funnel now. How is that going to spur on new development?
Well, that's a good question, but there are some projects that have gone through part of the process and are on hold in limbo. Whether or not this spurs them to go is the issue.
Okay.
But you're right. Someone just deciding to do something based on this could not get it done in 6 months.
Right.
Probably could not get a project designed, could not go through the permitting process, and could not be in a position to pull a building permit.
Would you maybe think of changing that to a technical review committee meeting, or a different criteria that triggers this?
Well, I think the intent, this is kind of the county's version of a stimulus bill, so it's almost shovel-ready types of projects. The idea is to get something going quick while we're in this economic recession, and that's why it's for only a 6-month period. But there is a possibility, maybe even a high probability, that this could be extended.
Well, that's what I mean. That's the point being is that
Right.
if you're using this to stimulate something that's not already in the process, the time frame is too tight.
Right. But there's a good chance it could be extended, and therefore it would be in someone's interest to start the process.
That's good intent, I think, and possibly helpful, but I think you're going to have a lot of economic changes before that small incentive is going to cause things to happen.
I think it's a given that if you're looking at retail or service, the demand isn't out there now, because consumer spending has constricted, credit has constricted, people can't get home equity lines of credit, they can't refinance their houses, they can't max out credit cards, so a lot less consumer spending, so a lot less demand, particularly for commercial type of development. And we've got a significant inventory of unsold residential. But anyhow, I think the board's position is every little bit helps.
Anything happening with Sunnyside Up? or Sunnyside, whatever that one was. That
Yeah,
was-
Sunnyside.
Yeah.
Actually,
Eggs.
I think, I'm not sure if you know, the developers, I think they have closed on the Bella Vista project to the west of that, and they're actively pursuing some alternatives with that property right now. But I don't think they're actually moving ahead with engineering design at this point, but it is still a viable project. And I know that we have a meeting coming up on Liberty Park. I'm not sure the nature of it, but we, at least that appears to be still alive, too.
I have a question for you on that Liberty Park issue. We had a list of 5 or 6 or 7 areas that were going to be conservation. Has that happened? I mean, no, it has not.
No. In the approval, there were timeframes for that to happen. And those, yeah, it's tied to preliminary plats.
Okay.
So they got to come in for that.
Yeah.
I've got a question with going back to the impact fees. Do we have any idea how many square feet of retail space, say, is in the pipeline?
No. Actually, we probably do. I mean, I could probably get, in our community development report,
You would have
you
it.
could go through and see it. I can tell you,
What
I can tell
is
you-
it in the pipeline means of how
Well,
broad do you
that
want
would
the
apply
pipeline?
for this, to be eligible for the impact, for the reduction in impact fee.
I can tell you probably, there are a couple 100,000 square feet.
Because my only question, and I wasn't able to go to the county commission meeting because I was snowed in Athens, Georgia, but if I had built a building last year and had rental space, and now the county is giving a competitor incentive to be able to build a similar rental space and thus charge less, I'd be a little mad.
Yeah, there is
Especially in this time when there's so much empty retail space out there.
Yeah, there is an equity issue there,
Yeah.
and we will have a public hearing on it, and I don't know, the board may hear that issue. I have one more item that I want to bring to your attention. The board took another action, too, and again, related to the economic situation. And what they did, and this was a recommendation that came up at the Economic Summit that was held recently, and then the Communities Leaders Summit, too, and that was to really change the scope of responsibilities of the Board of Adjustment. The Board of Adjustment right now hears variances. That's their primary responsibility. And there has been a concern that developers at the time of certificate of occupancy sometimes have a difficulty getting all of their punch list items done so that staff can actually give them a certificate of occupancy. And the board felt that there was a need to provide an opportunity for a developer to get a certificate of occupancy with the understanding that he can correct these punch list items for a period of time after this. So what the board directed staff to do is go through the process, and you will see this will be an LDR change, to put in the LDRs, particularly with respect to the Board of Adjustment, the allowance for a temporary suspension of compliance of certain non-public safety requirements that the county has. And essentially the way this will work is staff will be given the ability to do this temporary suspension, and particularly the county administrator will. And if the county administrator doesn't feel comfortable with it, he can direct the applicant to take it to the Board of Adjustment. Or if the administrator doesn't approve this temporary suspension, it can go to the Board of Adjustment. We're going to be taking this to the Professional Services Advisory Committee. I think they meet next week, and then we will be bringing it to you probably the first meeting in April, I think. So
I have a question on that. What is the incentive for the developer to complete the punch list? I mean, is it bonded, or
we're putting that in the ordinance right now where the way we have it tentatively is, yes, there'll be a bond. There will be a cash bond, and what we're looking at right now, a cash bond in the amount of 0.5% of the entire construction cost of the project. To give you an idea, Stan was working on this. CVS has a $1.8 million construction cost. So that would come up to like a $9,000 bond. So at the end of, and that was exactly our thinking. There needs to be some penalty if all of the items aren't done at the end.
What's the time frame? I mean, the temporary suspension is for how long?
90 days.
90 days.
90 days. And I think some of the examples that the board uses are when there are a few trees that may be 6 inches too short, or we have some trees that don't meet Florida #1, or some of the hedges are 21 inches instead of 24 inches. Those are some of the examples, and
So it sounds, Bob, like the solution to this is to create another layer of administration and another layer of public cost.
Actually, we're trying not to. We're trying to keep this at staff level as much as possible.
Your time doesn't cost?
I go cheap.
That's good.
Aren't inspectors
I'll remind you
going to
of
be
that.
going out and making sure that in 90 days that they have, put in 12-foot trees instead of 11.6?
Never mind.
Right now, we
just work
usually
here.
right now we usually iron these things out, and actually we make sure that all the regulations are complied with. But I think this will allow a little more flexibility in these trying economic times.
But it come to us for an LDR,
Yes.
which we have to approve.
That you make a recommendation to the board on,
Right,
yeah.
recommendation, or pass us by, or whatever, okay. Just check.
Good.
Cash bond or a standby letter of credit?
We're looking at a cash bond.
Cash bond.
And these days, developers are telling us letters of credit, actually financial institutions are requiring sometimes 110% of the cash.
This is a
in place.
temporary measure, or is this going to be a long-term? This is a permanent change to the code, though, right?
This is a permanent change to the code. I think, the way it's being brought forth, it is, yes. It's a temporary suspension, but a permanent code revision.
And if you were to draw on the cash bond, the money would be used to correct the deficiency, or just...
No, actually, this is looked at as a penalty, and we would still pursue code enforcement action for compliance.
And they want to think, people may want to be careful what they wish for. So, I mean, I think the intent was to keep some of the let some of the bigger retailers, if they were in here, to open and get started, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, there were several examples that were brought up at the board meeting. One was a Subway that we had some landscaping issues with, and it took them a while. But again, the things I'm telling you right now have not been completely vetted staff-wise. Even our attorney's office hasn't signed off on it yet. But our thinking is, as you indicated, there needs to be a penalty if the 90-day period goes by and compliance isn't there. And we have to have some criteria as to the nature of these and the extent of the regulations that can be suspended. So these are some of the things that we're working on, but I do need to emphasize that it's not been completely vetted, so it may be a different animal when it comes to you.
Okay. Anything else?
That's it.
Attorney matters?
Nothing not, Mr. Chairman.
Nothing matters?
No.
We stand adjourned. Thank you all for coming.